All right, here with Chuck Wolf, biomechanist, functional anatomy specialist, founder of the Comeback Team. But we connected actually about a week and a half ago on the phone through Tom Walters. So, Chuck, thanks for jumping on with me.
Ryan, thank you so much for your time, man. I greatly appreciate it.
Was Ray Meyer the basketball coach at DePaul when you were there?
He had just retired and his son took over.
Because he was one of my coaching idols growing up because they always played Evansville, and Evansville had good basketball teams back then, but Evansville could never beat DePaul. Never.
And he was a very, very gracious man. I met him a couple of times, and he gave me as much time as I wanted, and he was just caring about people, obviously about his players and knew the game, but he was a man that was just what you see is what you got.
I just was always excited when DePaul basketball was coming to Evansville to play because I knew I was going to get a chance to watch him. And I was not a huge basketball fan, but my dad was. But I was a huge fan of coaches, and he just had that presence about him that he just handled things the right way. He's very professional, and he was very low pulse too on the sidelines. Like he never let much get to him.
Very humble, gave out the accolades to his ball players, and he's one of those old school coaches, obviously, that you had to work hard, you had to follow, you had to toe the line, but really cared about his players and about their education.
Talk through your path. I know you live in Florida, but you grew up in Chicago, so talk about your path a little bit for people.
Yep, I'm originally from Chicago. I've been down in the Orlando, Florida area for 27 years now, and have a master's in exercise physiology and a fellowship in biomechanics. Played minor league ball till I had two knee surgeries, and that was the end of my career quickly, especially back then. I remember when there was a White Sox team doc that was saying to his resident, we're just going to open the knee up a little bit and we'll take the scope and see what's going on. And then I've got two zippers on each side and since a replacement. But I've always had the passion of sports. And when I got my master's in exercise phys, I became an exercise physiologist at a large fitness facility in the Chicago area that was at that time the training facility also of the Chicago Bulls. So I had a huge opportunity to learn from a couple of great strength and conditioning coaches, Al Vermeil and Vern Gambetta, and just watching them and picking their brains back then. And since done a lot of speaking on some of the same circuits as them, and done a lot of presenting and education pursuits around the globe. Had a facility at one time, moved down to Florida with a large healthcare system and opened up a large training facility in Claremont, Florida, which is just west of Orlando, about 20 miles. And then back in 2003, started my company, Human Motion Associates. And my passion is gait and motion analysis and injury evaluation. And I'm able to take my two passions of baseball and biomechanics and blend it together. And I've been blessed to work with many athletes and grandmas and grandpas and everybody in between. But baseball seems to be still my passion, and to work with ball players that are referred from orthopedic docs, neurosurgeons, for people who have back issues, shoulder, knee, elbow. That's the big hot button right now. But I've seen a lot of guys from little league to major leagues and everything in between. So I'm blessed to do what I do. I don't work, Ryan. I play every day. I don't work. I just love what I do.
You getting injured, is that part of the reason why you got into biomechanics?
Well, I withdrew from school to go play ball. Always promised my parents that I would finish up my education. My dad was a pro football player way back in the day, and back in the leather helmet days, and he understood what my desire was. After it became apparent that my knee wasn't going to let me play the volume that's on a schedule, I went back and actually got to finish up my degree, had a major in organizational management and development, and a minor in exercise physiology. So I was always still around sport, and then said, to my family that I'm not done with education. When I graduated, I went on for a master's degree, and I first started on the clinical side because I'm a firm believer that if you have good clinical skills, that will carry over to the sports performance world. Not that it won't the other way, but it's just a stronger inclination in clinical, critical thinking, I believe, than going from sport to the clinical side. So developed that appreciation, particularly for movement, and that's where I've been able to still be involved with both clinical, but especially sports and sports clinical.
Al Vermeil, is that Dick Vermeil's brother?
Yes.
Was, correct? Yep.
Yes. And Al played for the 49ers at one time. He was a strength and conditioning coach for them for a while, and for the Bulls and the White Sox, because Reinsdorf owns both Bulls and White Sox, and he did both, and then he's stuck primarily with the Bulls.
And for you on the clinical side, that kind of helps take it over to the sports side, because you have more of a science-based background where you're involved with research and you understand the research side of it, but they can also take that to the field side of it. Exactly
right. And be able to communicate with, I work with a lot of physical therapists. They refer a lot after their patients have graduated or been discharged from PT, but also I network a lot with orthopedic surgeons, neurosurgeons, podiatrists, ophthalmologists, because we still have to see what we're doing first before we react. So to have that background, I feel blessed to be able to blend that clinical, that medical side with performance.
How do you kind of bridge that gap from maybe what the doctors see? Because obviously doctors are they're in performing surgeries. They don't get an opportunity to maybe see very many games. How do you bridge that gap to maybe what they think is going to help to maybe what's going to actually help a player or a person get back to regular activities?
That's an excellent question. And let me bridge it from the player's side first, because the doc says you're medically cleared, you're okay, everything is healed, but the doctor's looking at it from the medical side. I think many docs today in sports medicine are progressive enough to see that, okay, even though you're cleared medically, there's still that transition to return to play. I tell the athlete, look, you may be cleared medically. That just allows you to be able to start your progressions more aggressively. That doesn't mean you're ready to return to play. And especially for the younger athletes, that they think, hey, the doctor said I'm okay and I feel good. I said, but your tissues are tight. You don't have the 3 planes of motion and the glide in the joint that needs to take place when you're doing a particular movement. We need to do more movement prep. We need to do some soft tissue work. We need to be able to get that proper sequencing so you can perform more efficiently.
What does it feel like for you when you're in there with soft tissue work or you're doing assessments? I mean, what are some of the red flags that they're not ready to go yet?
I'd boil it down to 3 big movement rocks. I don't care if you're in sport or if you're a couch potato, movement is movement. It's just the intensity, the amplitude, the compensations, the idiosyncrasies that somebody presents with. So I could look at, grandpa who's been on the couch who has an interest in baseball, and I could look at a high-level 5-star athlete that's ready to go. Their movements are the same. It's just what's the amplitude, what's the speed, what's the intensity, what's the idiosyncrasy, and the 3 big movement rocks that I refer to, because this movement is so complex that we need to be able to boil it down and peel a lot of the stuff away. And I look at the foot and ankle complex, the hips, and the thoracic spine. Those are the 3 most mobile regions of the body. And if any one of those becomes limited in motion, you're going to see a compensation elsewhere. Typically, the sites of the top 3 that you see are back problems, knee problems, shoulder problems. And when there is an injury, the last place I'm looking is the site of the injury. I want to see how they look globally in their movements and looking at those 3 regions. And then I'll come in more locally to say, okay, here's what is limited in motion and here's how you're compensating.
So is there a way to prevent injuries?
Prevent? No. Reduce the risk? Yes. Yes. And especially today, when I see so many ball players and I see the facilities and the opportunities and the strength and conditioning professionals that are out there and the services that they can deliver to the masses, I'm seeing more and more limitations as ball players get stronger, especially in baseball. I am seeing that too many programs are sagittal plane dominant, meaning we move in 3 planes of motion. We move forward and back, flexion and extension in the sagittal plane. We move side to side, and abduction and adduction in the frontal plane, and rotation of internal, external rotation in the transverse plane. And I'm seeing too many programs that are sagittal plane dominant, that's enhancing too much flexion and extension, which is really limiting. The ball players are getting stronger. There's no question about it. Any athlete, they're getting stronger, but I'm seeing more limitations in rotation and that joint dissociation because they aren't working on mobility. To me, the number one way to reduce the risk of injury, yes, go out and do your stabilization movement patterns, go out and do your strength programs, but make sure that the quality of movement is good. And that's having proper movement in the foot and ankle complex, the hips and the thoracic spine. The quality of movement is good, but then we have to work on the mobility. We have to work on the flexibility, which is a component of mobility, but mobility is essentially taking flexibility and moving it and being flexible under load in 3 planes of motion. That's missing. I don't see the good quality of movement and good quality of mobility programs that are encompassing all 3 planes of motion. And that's why I'm seeing so many injuries of people these days.
I got my master's at JMU, and Bill Walton was our track coach. Not the Bill Walton that played basketball forever, but Bill Walton was our track coach, and we would have an advanced coaching class. And he talked about kids wearing shoes too early in age. And so I would have our guys work out. I still work out without my shoes on sometimes. I know people in the facility that I work out think I'm crazy because I've got my socks on, but I still work out to this day with my shoes off because I feel like it helps from the ground up, creates mobility, increase range of motion. And I think that is a big part of it too. I think we're restricting kids at a young age. We've restricted play for them, but we've also restricted them by not letting them be barefoot more.
And you have a good point there. You've got 24 muscles in the foot, and they have to be loaded just like any other tissues in the rest of the body. I'm open to doing some barefoot training. High dynamic work, you don't want to get to immediately.
No, for sure.
But I also don't say, let's do that for everybody, because I need to look at the foot structure first. If I see somebody that has, and let's just use the term loosely for a moment, a flat foot, they've used up a lot of their ability to decelerate because the foot should flatten out when you decelerate. If they're already there, I'm setting them up for possible injuries somewhere else. So I've got to look at the foot structure. But to your point, I am a believer that we should be doing some barefoot work because it is going to strengthen up the feet. And I'll see ball players a lot more reactive, or athletes of any sort, a lot more reactive.
And I think it helps with the biomechanic piece of jogging and bounding and that. I think it cleans some of that stuff up too because the foot naturally aligns where it's supposed to on the ground.
Exactly right. Yeah, it definitely does.
What was your first research paper?
Oh, God, you're going back a long time ago, man. First research paper ever? Ryan, I can't recall that. However, let me go back to one of my big defaults way back in the day, and that was a book called, it was by Merton Root, Normal and Abnormal Function of the Foot. And what's interesting about this is when I was an undergrad and finishing up at DePaul doing my undergrad work, we had to do, in our kinesiology class, we had to do a paper, a biomechanical analysis, and I did it on the throwing motion. It may have been the pitching motion. And I said at the beginning, I'm just going to do it from the ankles on up, from the calf on up, because we don't really need to know the foot that well. And when I first started in the industry 44 years ago, I thought, I don't need to know the foot that well. And that was the biggest mistake I ever made early on. And once I started reading that book, or at least big excerpts of that book, normal, abnormal function of the foot, it just opened up an entirely new paradigm for me of how I look at people and train people. So I've been known in the sports world and the fitness world as the foot guy, because I've got to know what's going on there first before anything else.
So when you're training people with their gait or jogging, what are you emphasizing with the foot? And I know everybody maybe does it a little bit different, but what are you emphasizing? What are you looking at as far as, okay, that looks good to me, that looks like they're ready to go to me, or this doesn't look right to me?
I'm looking at a number of things. If I can go to the foot and ankle complex, if you said, look, I've only got 30 seconds, tell me what you're seeing with this person, I'm probably going to have them do either a lunge or a single leg mini squat. If they can't control the stability, then just toe touch with your opposite leg, because I want to see what's going on at the foot and ankle complex. I'm looking for the quality and the mobility of ankle dorsiflexion, tibial internal rotation, forefoot abduction, and calcaneal eversion. So in other words, as the foot flattens out, let's put it that way, as the foot pronates or flattens out, it goes through those four components: ankle dorsiflexion, tibial internal rotation, forefoot abduction, and calcaneal eversion. Those four things have to happen. And if you want, I've got a foot model here. I can go pull it in if you want to play with it.
Let's do it. Bring it in.
Excuse me, just one moment.
Sorry, people listening in. You'll have to go to YouTube to watch this portion of it. So head over to the ABCA YouTube channel, and you can actually watch the demonstration of this with the foot.
All right, so here's the foot, and ankle dorsiflexion, if you look at it from the side, is as the tibia comes over the foot. Most books, most anatomy, most biomechanist classes talk about ankle dorsiflexion of the foot coming up, which it is an open chain. But as you well know, when the foot hits the ground, a lot of stuff happens. And think of the hip has to go over the foot.
Not coming up. It's
not.
The ground.
It's the tibia that's going forward.
Yes.
So as that happens, what also should happen is that the calcaneus, the heel, is going to dive in. It's going to dive, medially or towards the midline. As that happens, the tibia, which sits on top of the talus, which sits on top of the calcaneus, the heel, is going to rotate inward. The simplest way to think about it, as I've written before, is think of the foot and ankle complex as a bicycle, and you got a rider on the bike. The bottom of the heel is the tire interfacing with the ground. As that rider starts to fall, that tire is going to start. If you're going to fall to in this case, this is the left foot, you're going to fall to the right. The bottom of the tire is going to go out to the left. But you, as the rider, which is the tibia, is actually the tibia is the helmet. What's between the tibia and the calcaneus is a small bone that has no muscular attachment called the talus. That sits on top, and the tibia sits on top of the talus. The talus kind of dives in. So as your bike is starting to fall, you as the rider are going to look and see where you're falling to. The tibia, which is the long bike helmet, is then going to rotate to see where you're going as well. So what happens there is now we've got ankle dorsiflexion. The heel dives in, which is calcaneal eversion. The tibia internally rotates. And how we define movement away from the spine, we look at the distal bone or the further bone in relation to the proximal or nearer bone. Well, as the calcaneus dives inward, I'm going to put this here. So my chest for the moment is representing the ground. As the tibia dives in, the relative position of the forefoot, of the midfoot and the forefoot, meaning the long bones of the foot and the toes, are relatively lateral to where the heel went. That's called forefoot abduction. Those four components have to occur. If they don't, any one of those four components are limited in motion, you're going to see a compensation and limitation up the chain. Well, okay, big deal. So it goes up the tibia. But the problem is that the tibia, if it doesn't rotate in, the femur's not going to rotate in. If the femur doesn't rotate in, you're not going to have as much internal rotation of the glute and the hip on that same side. So the glute's not getting loaded. And now you're not going to be able to rotate into that hip very well. If you're a thrower, you're not going to be able to reach as far and come across your body because of something that may be happening further away. So I have to understand what's going on at the foot and ankles. When we look at this, you do a mini squat. I don't need anything deep, and I definitely don't want it as a pistol squat. You will never hear me prescribe a pistol squat.
It's an advanced exercise.
Anybody.
But it's an advanced exercise.
And, you're going to get all the strength and conditioning coaches who are listening right now. We're going to start zinging me, and I'll go through it biomechanically.
Why not? With you, too. It's an advanced exercise.
But the mini squat, I'm able to see what's going on at the foot function. Once I understand that, I can extrapolate what's going to happen further on up the chain.
And you have talked about that on the pre-call, and this is, obviously, it works up the chain. And so if we have some immobility at the foot, it's going to work its way up. And you and I talked about the research that came out. And this was a research that was coming out in the early 2000s with Tommy John surgery with the front elbow and being immobile and then overcompensating with the throwing arm. Go into a little bit more on that for people that maybe don't know that. I don't know why more people don't know that, but go into that a little bit more and how the lead hip does affect the throwing arm in that.
There is a huge relationship, a biomechanical principle and relationship of the opposite hip and opposite shoulder, that if you have adequate internal rotation of the opposite hip, so let's say the hip opposite the throwing arm, if you have good internal rotation into that hip, that will enhance the internal rotation of the opposite shoulder. However, if you're limited in motion, that shoulder is not going to be able to internally rotate as well. However, when you got a ball player that has the forces of the arm through the acceleration phase, coming through at 7,000 degrees per second, that humerus on a tight hip, and you can't rotate into that hip, that humerus is going to go further and faster than the radius and ulna. Well, there's a secondary valgus force that's happening at the elbow. So I have to understand what's going on at the hip to understand what's going on at the elbow, because if you can't internally rotate, let me kind of track this back a little bit. If you do have good internal rotation of that hip, the scapula of the opposite side is going to protract easier, which will allow better internal rotation. But you're limited in rotation on that hip. That scapula is not going to be in the proper position that it should be, which places more stress at the elbow. Then you see that secondary valgus force. I'm sorry, you're going to have a limited rotation of the shoulder, which is then going to have a secondary valgus force on the elbow.
Say we have a youth coach or youth parent listening in right now. What are some maybe correctives or prehab exercises that they can do with a young kid? Maybe even a kid that's not even in the weight room yet because they're too young. I mean, I think you can do all that stuff with the younger kids, but that's for another conversation. But what are some things that maybe people can get ahead of the curve on that to allow better ankle mobility, to allow better lead hip mobility? What are some things that they can do to maybe head this off at the pass?
What you do with big leaguers as far as movement prep, I'm a firm believer that there's a lot of that you can do with the little leaguers. And if you develop those good patterns young, they'll carry through to whatever level the older athlete might be. And I'm a firm believer in you need to do lunges in all three planes of motion. You need to go forward and back, side to side, and rotation. And there's a triplane lunge. So imagine that somebody's standing in the middle of a clock. You have 12 o'clock in front of them, 3 and 9 to the sides, and 4 and 8 o'clock in rotation. And I would have that athlete do a lunge to 12 o'clock each leg. Then, so they're lunging forward. Then I'm going to have them do to the 3 o'clock and 9 position, I'm going to have them step out with external rotation and get length, because I want not only the external rotation, but keep that trail leg straight. Keep that knee extended and the foot flat on the ground. If you see that a ball player can't do that, their adductors, their inner thigh muscles, and or the perineal muscles, the muscles on the side, on the outside part of the calf are tight. And that's going to cause the foot to come up. On pitchers, I see that a lot, and they'll spin out, but they won't be able to evert or pronate very well and keep the foot flat on the ground and keep the knee straight. So this is telling me what's going on in the adductors, and they'll do that on one side than the other. Then they'll shorten their stride, keep their foot forward, get the hip over knee over foot, and you're going to see a big load that's taking place in the hip and the glute complex. And we do that on both sides. Then what they're going to do is keep their, for instance, right foot facing 12 o'clock and rotate, step out to 8 o'clock with the left foot, or 4 o'clock with the right foot, with the left foot staying at 12, and open up opposite hip to opposite shoulder, what I call the anterior X factor. And you need to get that mobility, because if you have good mobility in lengthening the opposite hip to the opposite shoulder through the front side, that will enhance external rotation and extension. Well, as a pitcher starts coming through their delivery and they're going through the acceleration phase down the mound, they better have good anterior X factor mobility. So they're going to lunge in those planes of motion. I'm also going to do a lot of frontal plane movements to stretch out and mobilize the inner thigh, the adductors. But then I have the ball players do wide rotations. Imagine that there's a flashlight in your navel, and anytime there's only 3 cues, maybe 4 cues that I use. One is from the hip to the top of the head, stand tall, get that length, because that's going to stack the spine the way that it should in an anatomical manner, and that's also going to promote the greatest amount of stability and mobility for the thoracic spine and the lumbar spine and the hips. So as they start just walking forward, turn into the lead leg, do a wide rotation. The second cue that I use is, so that flashlight in the navel, I call that the beacon of life. Shine that all around the room. Anytime that you rotate, shine that all around the room. Secondly, reach with the scapula. Don't reach with the arm, because right now I'm just reaching with the arm, Ryan. I'm not getting much motion. But if I reach with my scapula, you see how much more thoracic rotation and mobility of the shoulder girdle, which is including the scapula, it's taking place. So reach with the scapula as you do that. Do 5 to 10 on each side, turning the hip into the lead leg so that rotation doesn't go through the lumbar spine. Then I'll have them do figure eights. They're holding on to, if they're out in the field, do it with their arms or hold on to your glove. And if you're strong enough, maybe take your bat and you're making big figure eights, turning the hip into the lead leg, turning the shoulders into the lead leg, into the opposite side, or turning into the lead leg. So you're getting thoracic mobility. At the same time, if you do these correctly, you're also going to get mobility in the foot and ankle. Those are some of the things that we do. Well, then off of that, we can do crossing patterns, and think of a shortstop going up the middle and getting on a forehand side, getting on the backhand side with crossover steps. Those are mobilization techniques, and at the same time, strengthening techniques, because we're loading the system. With the younger kids, they have to first have the mobility. They have to first be able to control their own weight and quality of movement before you start using external weights.
And to your point about it, you may not be able to prevent injuries, because I don't know if you've ever seen Spencer Strider's hip workout that he does before he throws. Now, he has massive legs, but that guy has as much hip mobility as anybody in the big leagues and still got banged up a little bit. So it may happen.
Now you're going into, yes, and that's reducing the risk of injury, but we've talked a little bit about hip mobility and the reaction or the stress to the elbow. There's, I've got a slide right here of 4 old timers that 3 of the 4 are in the Hall of Fame. The 4th should be in the Hall of Fame, but political stuff is not allowing that.
We won't get into that.
I don't want to get into that. But between the 4 ball players There's 94 years of major league service. Amongst the 4 ball players, there's more than 1,300 wins. And out of all of them, one of them had an elbow injury, and that was on the very last pitch that he threw in the major leagues in his career. And that was after 25, 27 years. And now, then below that, I've got, and those guys get their chest over their lead leg. They're flexed at the hip, they're flexed at the knee, and they get their chest over the lead leg.
We talked to Brandon Agamannoni. He was a scout for a long time. This will be last week's episode, the one that comes out before this one, but we talked about it. I guarantee all of those guys had an overhead delivery with their glove.
I'm sorry, with their glove?
I guarantee they all took their
they didn't. Some of them did.
Nolan Ryan.
Some of them did. Nolan Ryan's one of them. Yeah, he's the one.
Tom Seaver went for a little bit. He might have changed it up.
I think he changed it. I think Maddox
went over the head for a while.
Clemens, I don't think did. And
early on, he was.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Who else am I thinking?
Greg Maddox is the 4th one.
Maddox tinkered around with it a little bit too.
And all these guys threw 93 plus.
And with command.
With command. Okay, people are going to say, well, Maddox didn't throw that hard. Yeah, later in his career, he didn't.
He did.
But early on, he was throwing in the mid-90s. But he was able to spot up.
I think Steve Carlson was another overhead delivery guy. Bob Gibson was an overhead delivery guy. You look at those Hall of Fame pitchers. They all had good rhythm and flow to what they were doing, which allowed them to get into a good position at foot strike. But
I've got 8 guys right here that form this. They overstride. Let's put it that way. Significantly overstride, which extends the knee and drives that lead hip backwards. Now, I don't know what their hip mobility is like, but let me put it this way. When you take a tether and you stretch it as far as you can, under force, that tether is eventually going to break down. Especially when we start considering the structure of the filaments of muscle tissue and collagen and connective tissue, it doesn't like to go through a lot of rotation. They act in a really more rigid and more for straight on movement rather than rotary motion. So when you get somebody who might have a tight hip and they overstride and they can't get their chest over the lead leg, and now the knee is extended and the hip isn't in position to absorb force, the quads are in position to absorb force, the lat is fully from the shoulder down to the lumbar fascia to the opposite hip is at full tension. The shoulder is no longer in a position to even absorb much force. All these guys that I've worked on say they feel it right at the point of release or after release, and that's where the secondary valgus force comes in. I know for a fact this is what happens with these guys. And with these pictures, I've got 6 of them that amongst the 6 of them have 9 UCL surgeries. But nobody's looking at stride length. And stride length to me with hip mobility. So if I can do a gait and motion analysis, see what's going on globally in their overall functional movements, then let me see their throwing mechanics. Yeah, everybody talks about the forces on the elbow, and there's great research out there. But I truly believe we're looking at the wrong place, or at least at the wrong time. I'm not discounting anything that's been discovered so far, but we're not looking at it at the point of greatest intensity and greatest load on the arm and the elbow.
Well, it starts with the handbrake. You know, if the glove and the lead knee are breaking on time, the ball should be up where it's supposed to be, but I think that's where a lot of issues start with pitchers too, is their handbrake is late, so their arm gets up late, so they've got to rush to try to even throw a strike or get the ball out, which is putting a ton of stress. You look at the front leg, those guys you're talking about, they all landed with a bent front leg, and then at release, that's when they firmed up. I think people try to rush that piece of it too, where they're so concerned with firming up their front knee that I think they're trying to do all of that stuff too fast.
You know, I'm not saying that you shouldn't at some point get the knee into extension.
It should be as the ball is being released. It should, just like with hitting, it's very similar to hitting. When the barrel is in the contact zone, that's when your front knee should be starting to firm up. It's very similar with throwing and hitting.
But when the bat's in the contact zone, the hips have started to rotate.
Yes.
The issue is with these guys, their knee is extended before their hips rotate. When you have a flexed knee and then the hip starts to rotate and the back leg comes around, functionally, biomechanically, the knee has to externally rotate and extend. That's where you're going to get that stability. That's where you're getting that ability to push into the ground, create that stiff front side, and then turn into it. I can't tell you how many pitching coaches there are out there that say, oh no, you got to land on a stiff front side because you need a stable front side. I said, I'm not doubting that you need a stable front side. The question is, when in the sequence does it start to stiffen? You use up all that stiffness early on. Too early, you don't have any more room, any more range of motion to have that happen. It's got that energy has to come out somewhere else. And let's take with that, how many guys today, when they throw, that back leg just whips around and they fall off to the first or third base side. Why does that happen? Because they don't have enough mobility. They've used it all up with a stiff front side. Now, when you see a guy whose front foot spins out at the same time, I want to see both the foot structure and I want to see the mobility of the hip, because they don't have the motion. That energy has to escape somewhere.
That was one of the things that we paid attention to with our pitchers is that foot strike. The guys that threw the hardest, stayed the healthiest, and threw the most strikes, their foot stayed stable through the entire thing. Once their foot landed, their foot stayed stable through that entire process.
And how many innings did they pitch?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. We're not limiting you to 4 innings because we're watching pitch count. I'm not saying pitch count doesn't have an impact, but it's like, Ryan, if you come to me and say, look, every time I hit a nail into the wall, I hit my thumb, I'm not going to tell you use fewer nails. I'm going to teach you how to do it efficiently and properly so you don't hit your thumb. And that's what's happening here is that, hey, somebody goes down, you used up all your bullets, next guy up.
You know, with you, when you do get a guy from a doctor, as far as feel for you, I mean, there's some theories out there as far as the Tommy John protocol and what guys should do. I'm kind of in the new camp where I think we could tweak that a little bit. I think that throwing protocol is too old because they put a lot of bullets on them in a short amount of time, where I don't think you give the athlete an opportunity to maybe work into it. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that as far as the Tommy John protocol, the comeback.
Some of the protocols that I have seen, I think, are way too much volume too early on.
And also restrictive as far as, okay, if you don't get through it, then you go back to step 1. I just think there's a lot of volume in the beginning for them where it's not
way too much.
It's not a steady on-ramp.
Correct.
Like for a healthy athlete, they're going to on-ramp. You know, so I don't know why we've gotten away it should be a steady on-ramp for somebody that's coming off surgery as well.
You know, even with a healthy ball player, and if they've shut down for 2 or 3 months, I still think it's too much volume to start with. You know, volume is not just how many throws, but it's also incorporating the intensity and the distance. I also have to look at the quality of movement. The thing that we often see with ball players who have had shoulder or elbow injury, and I'm not going to say surgery, but injury, but if they've been immobile for a bit, particularly at the shoulder, they lose the anterior glide. As they go into external rotations, coaches talk about, okay, I need to get this external rotation, the layback. Okay, but what's going on at the shoulder, and is there that anterior glide? If you don't have the anterior glide, you're being inefficient. You're going to see the shoulder, you're going to see the arm, you're going to see the elbow, the humerus, the shoulder, the thoracic spine, and the hips all come through together at the same time. It's like a door that's closing. And as you know, it should be more like a wave. It should be a little bit of dissociation. So when coaches talk about back to throwing, after an injury, I've got to look at the mobility first. I am not if I see a ball player that is too immobile, and when I'm saying immobile, I'm not just talking about from a flexibility perspective, but if the shoulder has been immobile or the elbow's been immobile and it's affecting the shoulder, I need to get the glide and I need to get the mobility first before I go ahead and start strengthening them. Because if you just strengthen them without the proper triplane mobility, I believe that we're doing them a disservice and we're really taking them down the wrong path, because they are not going to get not only the 3 planes of motion, but the 4th degree of motion, and that's translation.
And again, we talked about with the lower half, but with the anterior glide, how can maybe a youth coach or youth parent help their child be able to help with that, the anterior glide?
What they can do is just have, and we'll do this slowly and passively, have them hold on to the screen or hold on to the dugout, the pole of a fence at Little League, and place the ball player in a throwing position. And from the hips, don't drive it from the top, but from the hips, rotate the hips towards your target, and think of a wave. Think of how this fluidity of motion is going to occur. Think of a spiral staircase through the spine. Let the shoulder, let the pecs stretch out, and let that shoulder just kind of glide forward slightly ahead of the humerus. The way to think about it is, look at the 2 ends of the bone. Where one end of the bone might be, so if you're throwing and your humerus is pointing, let's say, to second base as you come over the top, the opposite end should be going slightly ahead and forward of where the position of the opposite bone should be, if that makes sense. So we can do this in a stationary position by just doing things like this without doing any mobilization or soft tissue work. Have them do wide rotations and figure eights. Get the mobility, just get the arms to flow with the hips, but don't resist it. Just let the arms go, because as the hips go and the arms stay loosey-goosey, you're going to see it's going to just flow. And that's the thing. The body works on rhythms. Sport works on rhythms. Music works on rhythms. Just let the body become rhythmical. And you're going to see a lot of this go, especially at the younger age.
At what age is general soreness post-throw for a pitcher okay?
At what age?
Yeah. At what age do you feel like post-puberty?
Look.
Or should there ever be a time?
Even when kids, let's take sport out of it for a moment.
On that, I don't think there ever really should be a time where you're sore. But
well, look, it depends on load, right? I mean, just say kids, they go out and jump on a trampoline, or they jump and play and run up and down hills just being kids. How many times do they come in and say, Mom, Dad, I'm really sore? And 48 hours after, they're sore, but afterwards it starts to go away. So depending on the load and intensity is one of the variables that's going to indicate tissue soreness. My general rule is that if you're sore the next day, and I don't care if it was a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 22-year-old, if it's new intensity, new volume, meaning more than what they've been used to, and you're sore the next day, I'm okay with it. I also tell them you're going to be more so the next day, because the peak soreness is typically 48 hours after the bout of work. If they are sore past 48 hours, I get a little concerned. If they're sore in the belly of the muscle, I'm not overly concerned. If they're sore at the attachment sites by the joint, I'm extremely concerned. Let me give you a case in point. I was working with a ball player, a high school kid, really high-level kid. His junior year had Tommy John surgery. That's when he was referred to me, after he had his surgery. He was immobile in certain areas, and he was athletic, but not the way that he should have been. We got him going. He was doing great. His velocity returned more than what it was prior to his surgery. 3 weeks, they're in fall, they're in winter training, getting ready for the spring season. 3 weeks before the season starts, The coach gets this wild idea and says, I want you guys, his whole team, they did lunges around the football field. Forward lunges. That's a quarter mile of lunges. Okay? Then the school's 3 stories. They ran up and down the stairs to the 3rd floor and down. Then they did lunges backwards around the football field. Then they did some other stupid, I don't know what I can say on your show, but stupid stuff.
Too close to competition. Like there's a gradual build-up for that stuff, and that's where the college coaches have an advantage with some of that stuff that they do post-fall, where the fall season's done, but they have a longer window of time before they have to compete. So there's a longer recovery time for that.
Absolutely right. Too close to competition. But let me finish this story. I, at least every other day, test their range of motion and test their strength. I use, I think it's a really good device by Arm Care. There's no political there. I have no affiliation with them other than using it, but it's a good device and gives us good reports. This kid's strength went down for about 2 weeks. His velocity went down about 5 miles an hour, if I recall. And he's just immobile. He's weaker in strength work. He said, my arm just feels dead and I just can't get anything behind it. I said, you don't have
nervous system's on shutdown.
Exactly right. Exactly right. First 2 games of the season that he pitched, he didn't do well. And then I said, we're just doing mobility work. We need to get recovery. We need to get regeneration. We finally came back up, but where in anybody's right mind? You talk about even a longer window. Don't give me a half a mile of lunges. Give me good quality movement and proper volume, proper intensity.
That general soreness in the belly of the muscle, which obviously is bicep, hamstring, what are some of the best ways to maybe post activity to allow the recovery process to be better in those areas?
I'm sorry, where? In the arm or just anywhere?
So obviously the bicep and then the hamstring is probably where we're gonna see some of that build up in there.
I do. I also see it in tricep and lat if it's throwers. Yep. I want to get these kids to move. Yep. I want them to move immediately because movement is going to enhance the blood flow. It's going to enhance the healing process. It's going to bring more oxygenation. It's going to remove metabolic byproducts. But then I want them to go and toss, even if it's 45 feet, and toss easy for maybe 15 throws. Then I get them to run. Now, if it's a hamstring and they're having some issues, maybe we'll get on a bike or we'll do something different. I'll do some easy mobility drills, but I just want the movement. The thing that I don't think is done enough, especially for pitchers, is running. And I'm not talking about poles. Look, when I hear of teams and coaches that have these kids run 2 and 3 miles, I'm thinking, for what? They're not cross-country runners.
We wanted them doing a lot of heart rate variability stuff.
Huge
to get the blood pumping, then calm down, then get the blood pumping. I was a big fan of heart rate variability stuff with
huge,
especially starting pitchers to again flush the blood through the system to clean out those areas.
Huge advocate of heart rate variability. Huge advocate of it because you're going to see the shorter bursts of energy, but high intensity energy, and that's what you do in the game of baseball. To have these kids just do long distance, steady state work, you're missing the point.
And I would rather have multiple times. The only time that our starters did that is for mentally, if they felt like they could decompress an outing better that way, then I was completely fine with it. And it still went back to their performance. If they were performing well competitively by doing it that way, that's where you take some of the theory of it out, because if a kid is performing well and they like the routine that they're doing it and they were staying healthy, then I would allow our pitchers to do that. But again, if they weren't, then you maybe have to make an adjustment. I think that's the art to some of this stuff too, is that I know people ran Tiger Woods through the ringer on his workouts because he's puking, but I mean, you're in AWRE Meals facility with the Bulls. Michael Jordan's workouts weren't normal. What he was doing with the guy that wrote his book, his trainer that worked with Kobe too, I'm sure those workouts were not normal, but it worked for Jordan and Kobe. Now, those are different But I just don't think you can tell an athlete, hey, you shouldn't do it this way if you're having performance on the field and you're staying healthy.
If you're staying healthy, I have no problem with the long distance running. If you, like you said, if it's going to help them mentally and just decompress, I'm okay with it. And that's usually done once, maybe twice a week at the most.
At the most, tops.
But we need to get the high intensity, very short duration, even if it's 15 to 20 to 30 yards. Let's do repeats of that. I'm okay with it. Walk back, go it again. I would rather see that accumulatively of, I'm not saying I'm doing this, but I'd rather see a coach say they ran cumulatively 2 miles, but we did all kinds of agility work and sprint work.
Yes. And that's a primer too. I think that's what we're still trying to educate coaches on too. That pre-throw day needs to be all sprint work to prime the central nervous system to go out the next day and pitch.
Absolutely correct. And here's the thing: if coaches are trying to improve their ball players' cardiovascular efficiency, it's been proven that high intensity work not only is going to help their strength and explosiveness, but high intensity work is going to improve cardiovascular efficiency, and lactate threshold levels will be elevated, but it doesn't work the other way around. So if I need a kid who needs to maintain his cardio work and his cardiovascular efficiency, but I don't want to wear him down, let me do short, high-intensity work, and I know I'm maintaining his aerobic capacity. But it's the maintaining aerobic capacity.
Do 15 seconds of jumping jacks on and off. Plus, it saves
Exactly
you
right.
time. Like, I don't think that coaches realize that part. It's more bang for your buck. It saves you time, too. You don't have to spend as much practice time on it.
And well, you just hit on something, because how much time do coaches? We need to get the conditioning in. You don't need that much time.
No.
If it's monitored, if it's programmed properly, you don't need that much time.
Yes, you do not need that much time.
Yeah.
What else? What other research for you that you read or you've done that people need to hear right now that maybe people aren't talking about from an arm injury standpoint?
Most of the things that I've been reading, and I had to get away from it for a bit because I would get too amped up. My passion with this, Ryan, is with all that's going on. For the last 9 years, I've been doing a study on UCL injuries. And how it started was 9.5 years ago, I had 3 evaluations, referrals from orthopedic surgeons on a middle school, high school, and college pitcher. All 3 of them came in with elbow injuries. And what I found with the 3 of them is that each of them had less than 30 degrees of internal hip rotation of the hip opposite their throwing arm. And I'm thinking, okay, this is coincidental. I went and pulled all the files I had in those days and there were 24 elbows that I evaluated. 23 of them came back with less than 30 degrees of internal hip rotation. That, to me, that's a trend. And it's been that way for 9.5 years. So I've read, a lot of things from Fleissing. I've read from, a lot of studies out of Japan. I've read some of the literature and I can't think of those at the moment.
Japanese mobility workouts are tremendous, by the way.
Very good, no question about it.
Now, again, it doesn't guarantee it because Shohei Ohtani got hurt, but and it doesn't guarantee it. But
take a look at his timing. He overstrides.
Yes.
Don't know what his lead. And he's a big guy, but he overstrides. I mean, he finishes up in that C configuration. So the latest research I haven't read recently. I'm starting to again. I've got some studies that I just pulled up and that were sent to me. But a lot of it is, to me, from what I'm reading, is reiterating what I've already read. And yes, it's showing me what's going on at the elbow. It's showing me forces at various phases of the throwing mechanics. But it's not looking at things in integration.
So how can we get that back? So with the internal degree of rotation there, 30 degrees, how can, again, we prehab that, and then post throw, how can we allow that mobility to come back? Because that's obviously when kids throw and throw and throw, they're going to lose some mobility in those areas. How can we help that to start, and then how can we help that post throw?
Again, in movement prep, that triplane lunge is one thing that I do. Kids who are really tight, I'll have them internally rotate. Those are stand in a staggered stance. And let's assume it's a right-handed thrower. Internally rotate that front leg as far as that front hip as much as you can. So take the foot and turn it in as much as you can. Take the opposite hand and just reach to waist to knee height. As you do that, drive your left hip outward to the side as you reach, and do 5 to 10 of those. Do it slow, do it controlled, because I don't want the rotation coming through the lumbar spine. But do it, and when you do so, keep the first metatarsal head, the big toe joint, firmly on the ground. Don't let the foot roll out. Keep it firmly on the ground. Then come back to neutral and see what your mobility is. I will guarantee you it's going to be improved. So it's just movement prep to understand how the myofascial system is working, and the relationship of joints from one joint segment to another. That's not being looked at. And we need to understand how that all works, because that's what's impacting the elbow injuries. There's no doubt in my mind that's what's impacting elbow injuries, because I've seen it time and time again. I've evaluated more than 400 elbows. And I see these same tendencies over and over again. And show me the videos of how you throw, and these kids overstride. They don't have the stability quite often because they're young. But even at the college, minor league, major league level, I'm seeing that they're overstriding. And we need to be able to look at that mobility. So when I do a gait and motion analysis, and then I correlate their throwing mechanics, yes, you alluded to earlier, is there hand separation too late? Yes. Do they drift off?
Part of that is kids trying to throw too hard too.
Oh, there's no question.
That's going to cause overstriding. Again, when you look, you talked about flow, and there's some fluidness to this and not rushing the delivery. But when you're trying to overthrow on every throw, it's going to cause some overstriding to it, because you're really trying to let it rip instead of just trusting what you're doing.
Let me give you an example of that. There's a ball player that he's now doing some coaching. He played 2 years in minor league ball. And this guy has a pitcher's body. I mean, he's 6'5", 6'6". And he's gone through 2 elbow surgeries. When he was rehabbing his first time, we were talking. I said, I'd just be curious to know what your mobility is in your hips. He goes, I'm very flexible. Okay. Which he was. However, after the second, and he had sent me some slow motion Edgertron video of him, his mobility was now working against him, because out of the thousands of video clips that I've evaluated, this kid had the longest stride I think I've ever seen. Because he said in their minor league clubhouse or in the bullpen, wherever it was, he said, there was a sign that said, if you want to make the major leagues, you must throw 98 plus. Now, you're an aspiring minor leaguer. What are you going to do?
Of course. We've talked about it multiple times. It's not pitchers' faults right now. It's the culture of what it is. It's just the culture of what it is, because obviously you're going to train to what's going to get you there so their heart's in the right place. But you also have to understand that the best ability is availability. So if you rush this process, you're going to get hurt, which you're going to be out of baseball anyway. So it doesn't matter. Keep rushing it, because you're going to get banged up. So you're going to be out of baseball anyway. So allow the process to happen naturally. And again, there's a lot of flow that needs to happen with the delivery that I just don't see. We see a lot of it right now when you look at the greats. But the greats also didn't have to pitch in this generation of it either. So,
but they were still throwing almost at that velocity. And maybe the radar guns back then aren't as good as they are now. There's no question.
I completely agree. I would like to take Hawkeye and be able to go back in a time machine with Hawkeye and have that on the old guys. I think we'd see the same thing.
Here's my passion though with this, Ryan, and you're kind enough, when we spoke the first time I told you this, but when you see more than half of elbow surgeries on teenagers, that breaks my heart. Okay? I mean, I want to see these kids succeed, and even younger. And the younger kids at Little League through high school trying to emulate what they see in pro ball. And, of course, they're being coached by coaches who don't understand biomechanics. They think they do, but they don't. They don't understand chain reaction biomechanics.
And their workload is way different. Their workload is way different at their age.
Way different.
Their
way different.
Throws off the mound is much different now than it was in the past.
100% agree. So my mission is to try and get some information out to the grassroots, because you're not going to get the college and older, college maybe, but the pros, generally speaking, aren't going to make the changes. I've had pros I've worked on. I've had multiple Tommy Johns say, look, I'm making millions of dollars. I'm going to throw this way. If I break down, they're going to pay for it. And I'll still be getting paid. All right, I get it.
Plus, they also have seen what happens with guys that try to make too many changes too, because you digress and then you get released and because you're underperforming.
And I get that. I totally understand that, and I don't disagree.
And again, we're talking about pros here. We're not talking about your 12-year-old can make changes. Your 10-year-old can make changes with their throwing. We're talking about adult big leaguers.
Strictly talking about the big leaguers or the pros. Let's put it this way. But here's the other thing with the pros. They've been doing this for a long time. And there's been a lot of remodeling of their fascial system, their connective tissue, and their bony structures that it's just due to the stress the body's adapted. You don't go and change that, because now we're setting them up for an increased risk of injury. And I've said to these guys, all right, well, I'm not trying to change your mechanics, but can we work on your mobility and your flexibility? And they said, yes, I'll do that. And then they start, and interestingly, quite often they throw a little harder. You know, if you have good mobility in 3 planes of motion, I use the analysis. You take a very strong, thick rubber band and you try and pull it. How much can you pull it and stretch it? Not very far, and you're not going to get too much recoil. But if you take a strong rubber band that has that elasticity that we can lengthen and then let it fly, you're going to have a more forceful and a longer and more mobile tissue.
And we've had two people on the podcast that are pushing in that direction. Dr. Ish Gallo and Tracy Hayes both have been on the podcast, and they are trying to push it to that level from a training standpoint. And both are doing, shout out to Tracy and Ish. They both are doing a tremendous job with their warm-ups and their workouts to be able to increase that.
So you increase that. And let's talk about the tensioning of tissues as the body overstrides. Now you're going to see improvements in elbow injuries, or reduction in elbow injuries. I will guarantee it. You know, the other thing that coaches need to understand, so much they talk about dissociation of the hips to the torso. I don't disagree. But you better have and understand the dissociation of the ilium, the hip bone, to the femur, the thigh bone. And there better be some degree, just a little bit of degree of the thigh bone, the femur, to the tibia, the shin bone, a little bit. And there should be a little bit of dissociation between the tibia, the shin bone, and the foot. So that's where the weight is going to come from. Then it filters up to the hip. Then it filters up. You better get thoracic mobility. That's going to impact scapular motion. That's going to impact arm motion. But if there is any tightness along that entire chain, you're going to see suboptimal performance. And you do suboptimal performance and you put excessive loads on tissues over time, they're going to break down.
You're in good shape. What do you do for working out?
For an old guy, I try to be anyway. All be said, I've got 4 joint replacements. So, I'm like the bionic guy. But still, I work a lot on my flexibility.
I do too.
Back in the day, back in my younger days, I lifted heavy weights and I paid for it. Now I do a lot more mobility. My cardio work is cycling. Even though I have a knee replacement, sometimes I try and get on a treadmill or on some just some grass, and just do some striders in running just to keep my hips and my torso loose. But these days I'm using about 4 days a week, I'm using blood flow restriction cuffs. That I'm able to get the buildup of lactate within me, and that increases the nitric oxide, which stimulates the growth hormones. But at the same time, I don't have to load my joints.
Where are you tying those off at? Elbows,
I've got
knees?
At my top of my bicep, just below the shoulder, and as high up as I can. Well, just below the hip.
How long do you have that on before you release it?
I usually go about 20 minutes.
You go that long? Wow.
Yes. Now, the cuffs that I use, and again, and this is no endorsement to any particular, but the cuffs that I use have, in fact, I got them right here if you wanted to see them, but it's almost like bevels. It's like, if here's a little pocket, I
want to see it.
Here's a little pocket next to each other. As they fill up, there's still like a gap and enough gap that the blood and the circulation go through.
I want to see, what company makes those?
It's B3 Sciences.
Okay.
And here, I'll show you the two sides. This is the arm.
Okay.
And this is for the thigh. I don't know if you can see how.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Right here are like the seams.
It almost looks like an ankle weight, almost.
Almost looks like an ankle weight.
Yeah.
But these weigh nothing.
Yeah.
And the thigh the lower extremity can go up to 300 pounds of mercury. I don't put it up that high. I do to maybe 250.
Okay.
240, about 80%. The arms go up to 200, but I do about 70%. But I go from movement to movement to movement to movement. I want to keep the heart rate variability. And I'll tell you something. Back in the day when we used to do 300 and 400 reps per body part, and we would work one body part, and you feel great. And even though it wasn't the best thing for me, the ego got in the way. I try and leave the ego outside now, but I feel as tired. And if you're looking for that pump, but that's not the point. The point is, I feel functionally stronger than I have in the past. And I was able to recover from my joint replacements a lot quicker because I prehab beforehand. I didn't have to load myself as much. I use this afterwards, and I feel pretty fortunate.
All right, everybody has to answer this one question. Do you have a fail-forward moment, something you thought along the way that was going to sidetrack you, but looking back now, it helped you move forward?
Fail-forward moment. It's a great question. I wish I knew that beforehand. I would have given better thought to it.
People that one sneaks up on people that haven't heard that one before.
The fail-forward moment is... can I give you two?
Yeah.
Even though it's not a particular aha moment, but early in my career, not understanding what's going on with the foot and ankle. Okay, I need to understand what's going on here. And I didn't take the time to do that. It's complex, but once you break it down, it changes your entire paradigm. And even though it's complex, there's ways to make it easy for anybody to understand. That's number one. Number two is, back in the early days, I used to think certain movement patterns are, why are you doing that? Why these exercises? Those are wrong. Those are incorrect. They're stupid. I have a very deep toolbox these days, exercise toolbox these days. And I may dig deep into the ones I don't use that much, but there's always a purpose for something somewhere. Have a rationale of why. Our industry, and in sport, looks at too much of what. I can look at digitized throwers or hitters, and it's showing me a bunch of whats, but it's not telling me why they're moving that way. Take the time and understand the whys. Early in my career, I looked too much at the whats, and I thought these exercises are dumb, but there's some things that I can use at some point. So
It's the same thing with coaching. I think as you get older, you have maybe drills that you used in the past that you can dig out that maybe with one player you can pull that out and it's going to help. And then some of the newer stuff you can use with everybody. But I think as a good coach too, like you're going to have some of those old drills that you got to hold on to that just for that one instance, you might pull that throwing drill out or that fielding drill out or that hitting drill out with a kid because that's going to help that one specific kid.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And again, have that movement pattern, exercise toolbox mentality because we'll be using it at some point. And have an idea of your progressions. Today I see too many practitioners that are looking for the quick fix and don't have strategy behind it.
There's
none of it.
Quick fixes.
None of it.
No. All right. What are some final thoughts and where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Well, I appreciate that. People can reach out to me at my website, which is humanmotionassociates.com. They can email me at let's do the easy way, C Wolf or Chuck. You can do Chuck at humanmotionassociates.com is my email address. As I mentioned earlier, I've been off social media for a bit, but that's going to change in the next couple of weeks because of things that I'm seeing and things that we're just about to do and get started to do. So I'm going to get some information out there. And all I'm going to ask is if people do, be open. The thing that's bothered me so much about
talked about it a lot,
social media,
and I've completely gone away from arguing with people online. I won't do it anymore because I'm just not allowed in my space. Like if somebody responds to something negatively, I don't even respond to it anymore, and I just don't allow it in my space anymore. And I think that's the best way to handle it, just because reading text is so combative, it looks harsh, and you don't get context from the text. And so that's why for me, I just don't even argue with people online anymore.
I wholeheartedly agree. I'm not saying, look, you may disagree.
It's okay to disagree.
Provide a rationale for why you disagree, and let's have a debate about it or a discussion, because guess what? I might be able to learn from you, and I know there's certain things that you'll be able to learn from me, and if we blend it together, maybe we come up with a better model. Yeah. But I've had too many guys that get too personal, or too many people.
It needs to be a collaboration, whatever it is, and healthy confrontation is a phenomenal thing. That's how you make changes and come. But this generation, it's just so black and white on if you don't agree with somebody. That needs to change, because in the old days you could argue with somebody and you weren't mortal enemies anymore, and that's part of growing. Yes. Is having a healthy conversation and having healthy confrontation about things.
The social media and the internet provide some very powerful tools.
Yes, it does.
But I think equally destructive tools, because
it gives everyone a voice.
Everyone a voice, but a lot of people that have the voice just throw things out there from their opinion, and they're just trying to get themselves heard, but don't have the empirical evidence behind it. Yep. That's the guy or the gal or the person that I'm going to cut them out. I'm open for criticism or constructive discussion.
I don't consider it criticism. I just think it's again, maybe people are asking questions, or maybe this is how I've thought about it, and that's the hard part when you read something, because the context is never there. The nuance is never there with the spoken word. And it is what it is. That's kind of the generation we're in. But I'm glad you're coming back. Like, we need more positive voices.
At the end of the day, if somebody does have a disagreement, no matter what we're doing, I hope at the end of the day, we are doing what we're doing to help people. Let it be, if I'm working on grandma and grandpa, if they don't get better, I take that personally, because I want to do everything I can to make them better. If I've got a ball player that isn't feeling better, my first thing is I want to have them throw more efficiently and reduce the risk of injury. Nothing's going to prevent, but reduce the risk of injury. If along the way their velocity increases, they're happy and I'm happy for them. But if we can have a discussion within our hearts that all we're here for is to help people get better, I'm open to that.
Yep, for sure. One big community. So,
yes, sir.
Thank you so much for your time. I had a great time with you. So I appreciate you reaching out to me. I'm glad you got to North Carolina, because the Wake staff is some of my favorites. So
Yeah, they're wonderful
shout out to the Wake
people.
staff. Shout out to Dr. Nicholson and the Wake baseball staff. You're tremendous people. But Chuck, thanks for your time.
Brian, thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you, and thanks for your time and allowing me to share with you today and for us to exchange ideas. It was a lot of fun and means a lot.